Okay, happy Friday, everyone. This is David I, and here in Scotts Valley, with me is Anders Olson.
Hello.
And on the line also is Al Manarino from somewhere way off in New York.
Hello, greetings to all.
I'm glad they've opened up the beaches in Jersey. I saw the ribbon cutting.
Most excellent.
Has officially started as of, 5 p.m. Eastern time today? Or maybe sooner.
That is correct. Oh yeah. You know, Long Island beaches, New Jersey beaches are all open for business. So come on down and enjoy.
I'm going to tell my daughter, who lives in Manhattan, to head to the beach and spend money.
Absolutely.
Help the Hurricane Sandy businesses that are back open again.
Absolutely.
In any case, everyone, welcome to this sixth episode of Developer Direct this quarter. This session is a follow-on to the global webinars we did on Wednesday, focused on on-device rapid prototyping. We promise not to repeat everything that we did on Wednesday. You'll get if you joined us then, or if you couldn't make it, you'll get an email, and we'll tell everybody where the replay is, and that'll show up next week at some point in time. This one we're going to talk about the usual things. We're going to talk about news. We're going to talk about technology, answer your questions, have a conversation. You can join the conversation on Twitter. Use the hashtag #EMBTDD, and you can follow us at EMBTDDirect as the user ID. You can also send us emails. People have been doing that to the global Developer Direct team, just developerdirect.online@embarcadero.com. And you'll oftentimes get multiple emails back from people because there's a bunch of us around the world who are all attached to that same email address. So even no matter what time of day, there's probably someone in the world that's on their computer during that time. This is the schedule that we've been working on. This week it's on-device rapid prototyping. Then we have two other Friday sessions to come, followed by the season finale. And for the season finale, send emails to us, post things on Twitter for things that you'd like to see, best of the season, best of the quarter, other things that you'd like us to cover in that season finale where we wrap it all up, and then look forward to the next season of Developer Direct sessions. As always, we start with some news, then go into the topic, do a bunch of demos, answer your questions, remind you of special offers, and so on. So let's just get right to the news. A couple items here. Anders Olson did a blog post a few days back, and with some source code to show you how you can modify the T-Web browser component for iOS, so that you can zoom in and out in the browser window that you have inside of your iOS app. And so it's a little bit of a change, and then I think it's one setting, Anders, I believe.
Yeah, it's just one line.
It's really one line of code, and he has the blog post that tells you right here to add, there it is, F web view set scales page to fit true. Add this line of code. So if you go to his blog post, you'll just take that line of code and put it inside of the constructor for the TiOS web browser service inside of fmx.webbrowser.ios.pass. Make a copy of it just to back up in case you screw something up, and then when you build, it will happen. Also, just a reminder, some of you have been saying, well, I don't have a Macintosh, what can I do? No Mac, no problem. There's a cloud service called Mackin Cloud, and you can sign up for an account. It allows you to rent time on real Macintosh hardware running in their cloud infrastructure. And with that, you can develop and test your iOS simulator applications. We're working with the Mackin Cloud people to make sure that you can deploy your apps there, that there's a PA server available on the Macs that you connect to. So it'll all be set up and ready for you to go. You can't connect to a device. I think they're working on some technology to try to figure out a way to, if you plug your device into whatever computer through USB, that somehow Mackin Cloud might be able to find it. But in the meantime, you can run the simulator just fine. Xcode is on the Macs, and so it's It's all there for you. If you've missed any episodes, here's the 5 replays for the 5 sessions that have happened so far. So I expect you all to just remember all of those 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, I guess 11 character IDs. You can also just go to the Embarcadero YouTube channel or search the internet for Developer Direct US Canada replays or Developer Direct Q2 2013 replays, and you'll find the links. They're all there. Also, just want to remind everybody, because people keep asking, how do I get a hold of the samples, some of the samples that we use, the code snippets that Anders and others refer to. We have all of our demos, all of our examples that ship with RAD Studio. In fact, for RAD Studio XZ, XZ2, XZ3, and XZ4, I forgot the XZ3 there, all of the demos are available on SourceForge. Just go to sourceforge.net/p/RAD Studio demos. And then from there, /code/capital H, capital E, capital A, capital D, /tree/branches, and you'll see XZ, XZ2, XZ3, click and XZ4, click on XZ4, and you'll see all the examples that are in your samples directory on your install, but they're always the latest versions. R&D pulls from RAD Studio when we do the builds of the installs and setups. Specifically for Delphi XZ4 mobile samples and iOS code snippets, you just go to RAD Studio X_XZ4, and then there you'll see FireMonkey mobile folder and also an iOS code snippets folder, and all the other C++ samples, Delphi examples, FireMonkey desktop examples. All of the things are there and constantly being updated, including the demo that we're going to play with today, the recipes demo. Will be put up there in a couple weeks. There's product management still doing some cleanup, but this recipe iOS example with the database, the InterBase database that drives it, that you can deploy using IB Lite, all of that will appear in the mobile samples area as well. As always, there's lots of other events coming up. I know some of the evangelists around the world are still doing events. I'm going to be in Southern California on June 4th and 5th, in Orange County on June 4th, and in Los Angeles, or actually Santa Monica, on June 5th. And Al's going to be in Montreal and Toronto on the 5th and 6th of June, right, Al?
That's correct. And we also added Boston and Washington, D.C., but those dates have not been announced yet.
Yeah. So stay tuned to the events calendar, and also, I think Seattle and Salt Lake City, I believe, as well, Anders, right?
And Denver, I believe.
So another 5 cities beyond what's there. So stay tuned to the events page for if you're in the U.S. You can also look at the blogs.embarcadero.com. There's been events happening in Brazil and all over Europe. People have been putting up pictures. It's always fun to see the developers. They just had an event with over 350 developers in Moscow the other day. So lots of tours happening all throughout the month of May and June and beyond. So let's get, there was a question here. Let's see. I haven't received emails for any replays of Developer Direct. The central place, yeah, Anders put the link to the TechNet. And then from there, I believe there's a Developer Direct playlist, but you'll find them very quickly. And I blogged the first 4 with direct links in my blog, and somebody probably put the 5th replay up as well from last week. So today's topic, on-device rapid prototyping. Of course, if you go back a long time, like some of us do, back to Delphi 1, we talked even back then about component-based development, being able to prototype the user interface, prototype the connection to data. Of course, back then it was to things like Paradox databases, and then with the BD and SQL links into Oracle and Sybase and so on. And so that is a replica of the original ad for Delphi 1 that we ran, that talked about going from prototype to production, from prototype back then to a 16-bit Windows Delphi application to a .exe. So fastest way, go from inspiration to your application. And since the beginning and continuing today with even more functionality, it's all about designing your user interface, using and extending components, prototyping your databases, connecting to databases. And we follow the fundamental tenets of the Agile Manifesto. Focus on the individuals and the users and the interactions, the user experience, and also the conversations. Having working software at all times, you just drag some components, wire up properties, put a little bit of code in, hit run. You've got working software all the time. Same thing in iOS, in Mac, and Windows, all works the same way. Same workflow, developer flow. Working with your customers, on Wednesday we did a scenario where we had the customer who was a noted chef. JT and I were the developers, and we went through iterative process to prototype the user interface, prototype the data set, and then hook the whole thing together. You'll see the end result, and we'll go through the source code and the data model for that. So interacting with customers and giving them what they want and showing it to them immediately, not just drawing a bunch of diagrams on paper or in some diagramming tool. Building the app, and that app is a real app, right? It's a real app, real executable underneath. And then when the customer comes back and wants changes, just change them real quick. Change a calculation, change a label, move some pages around, move some controls around, being able to extend the application by adding new tabs or whatever it might be, responding to a change. And ultimately that means you can get to market fast, you can get, or if you're building apps inside your company, you can get the apps to your users fast. So using rapid prototyping, starting a project, enhancing the project, very easy to do. Connecting to databases of all kinds, including enterprise databases, cloud infrastructures, multi-tier architectures, web services. What it means for all of you, that you're ahead of the curve. You're competitive in this whole ever-changing multi-device world. You've got the skills. You can take your Windows knowledge of FireMonkey and HD and 3D application programming. You now can compile it for Mac, compile it for OS, iOS. Same code base, same projects. And ultimately, as we go to other devices, Android, Windows, phone, whatever it might be in the future, just rebuild, take advantage of new capabilities, maybe some new components. If you don't see a component you like, there's third parties building components, or you can enhance the component. Like Anders did with that line of code. It didn't do zooming. He just went into the constructor and added the property setting for being able to zoom. Or you can inherit from a component. Under the IDE component, add component, you can choose an existing component or start a new component from scratch. And ultimately, you're in the code, you're working in the code, build your unit tests, you can maintain your applications and respond to change over time. And we have a success story. Bob Miller posted this note on one of our forums, and the thread ID is there. Bob was part of a team that entered the programming competition called the Cajun Code Fest. And the goal there was to build a working application that might have impact in the world. They programmed for 28 hours, and his part was they wanted to have an iOS native application to work as part of the complete solution. And he was able to do that using XE4 and Delphi for iOS. And they ended up winning an entrepreneurial award because their application was the most market ready, which ties back into this whole on-device rapid prototyping. You're building the app, it's a working, ready to go application that can be deployed immediately. He said that the Microsoft guys like us so much, they offered to help get it into trial areas. They won $5,000 and a bunch of other stuff. So they paid for, and beyond that, the license for XE4 and the mobile pack. You know, go and look at the thread, see what people are saying, go to the CajunCodeFest.org. Maybe you'll want to enter a contest, or if nothing else, you want to get applications done quickly for desktop, talking to databases and infrastructure, and building a mobile client. You can do it with XE4 today. So that takes us to this recipe app, and then I'll switch over to Al, who's going to do the first part of showing you how you can prototype your data set and data source. This app is designed for iPhone and iPhone 5, not the iPad currently, but obviously by doing things like layouts and doing alignments and doing anchors, you can run it on lots of different form factors. It works on the simulator and the device, and it can also run as is on Win32. And then you can use the same form, the same logic, the same data module, and build a Windows and a Macintosh version if you need to have a desktop application. It uses several parts of FireMonkey 3, the new Listview component, the enhanced list box, tab control, actions. Uses light bindings. This one is using DB Express, but could easily replace these components with FireDAC components for an even speedier, more flexible database access experience. It's got client data set, and it also uses IB Lite. It has an InterBase database that can be deployed to the device with our IB Lite static library linked in. The database is pretty simple. It's got two tables, a recipe and favorites. It's got two generators to generate unique IDs for each of the entries in the recipe and favorites table. And it's got two triggers that use the generators to get the ID, which is the primary key for each one, and do an auto increment of the generator after that is returned back to the application so that it can write to the database a unique recipe. The tables are pretty straightforward. There's some strings, there's the recipe ID. It's got a picture blob. We're not doing anything with the bitmap blob right now, but it's in the data model. And there's two other strings, a recipe URL and a video URL in case you've got links on the internet. And that's another case where we might want to extend the application to have the T-Web browser component inside of it. And so if you want to see a recipe, or maybe it's a search string for recipes like the recipe that you're typing the ingredients and description for. And it has a name, and the primary key, again, is that recipe ID that comes from the generator. The favorites table just has the ID of the favorite and the recipe ID as a foreign key that points back to the recipe itself. And so here's the generation of the foreign key by referencing the recipes table and the recipe ID and adding that as a constraint. Two triggers, and again, all they do is get the generator value and return it back to the client application. And they do that before the insert takes place. And then by calling gen ID with a (1), it will get the current value and then increment the ID or the generator by 1. And in this scenario, it started with a napkin, this noted chef. Well, they have napkins in, well, this looks like a paper napkin, but I don't know what maybe he'd even write on a cloth napkin. He just kind of diagrammed some ideas. He had an iPhone and he wanted us to build an app as developers. So just wrote it on the old back of the napkin, start prototyping the UI that way, and then meet with some developers and they can start building it, even if you don't have the database. And this is what the end result looked like. On the left-hand side is the iPhone, the real iPhone app. On the right-hand side is just the Win32 version. We use Win32. It's already you can pre-add it to your mobile template, mobile target platform. And it's there if you don't have a Macintosh and you don't have an iPhone. You can do a lot of testing and development in the designer and then test it on Windows, setting breakpoints and so on, having the real database. It looks a little different, of course, because it's a Windows window versus an iPhone application. But you can do a lot, especially if you're not using hardware bits that are only on the iPhone, for example. If you're not using the things that come in the iOS operating system, like the WebKit browser, although I could have a browser page and I'd just do a shell execute on Windows and bring up a browser window with the right URL. So we could do that and do if-defs along the way. Here's the project, what the project looks like for deployment features. We've got InterBase to go, DB Express, InterBase driver, and we need the Midas library because we're using the client data set. Here's a little of the information about the deployment. When I do project deployment, here you'll see the database iOS DB that's been renamed now in a later version to recipes.ib, but there's the database. It's being sent to the startup documents folder on the device is where it'll be found. We've got a license file here, that REG with a bunch of numbers along the way, .text, that's going to be sent out to the license folder in the startup documents area, and a few other things that get sent over. It's pretty easy. You set up these deployment file information things, and then when your app bundle is put together, when it starts up, some of these things will get loaded into the right directories so that they can be accessed by your application within its own little private sandbox area. And there's the project, pretty straightforward. We have the device target, the simulator, and I've added the 32-bit Windows target inside of the mobile application target just to do local debugging. Debug, ad hoc, and app store are the three choices for device. Ad hoc means if you've got an enterprise store, in a sense, inside of your company, you can do ad hoc deploy. So that's the way that Apple lets the enterprise customers get their deployment. For the simulator, you can choose which device you want by default to simulate. You can always go over the simulator, and there's a menu item for switching to different devices. And there's a data module, a little helper unit, and the main recipe form unit with the FMX file along with it. Okay, so Al, I'm going to turn it over to you as presenter to show people how easy it is to do some prototyping of data as part of the user interface, and then it'll come back to me, and I'll take you through the source code and use of the recipe example.
Oh, wonderful. All right, so I assume you're all looking at my RAD Studio XE4, is that correct?
I see it. I see the IDE.
And,
a lot of favorite projects there.
Yeah, I am. I have a lot of favorite projects. And as you said, most if not all of these are available at that Subversion link you gave everyone. So I just happily categorize them in my favorite folder sections here. So as David mentioned, I'm going to walk you through what you can do now with Delphi XE4 as far as rapid prototyping. So as David already mentioned, and most of you Delphi developers already know, if we went back to Delphi 1, Delphi's always been able to quickly prototype and move from quickly prototyping and move it to production very fast. And now with Delphi XE4, it's even easier to prototype the database connectivity to your application. So I'm going to introduce you to this new component called the prototype bind source component, and that's going to give us sample data in multiple formats that we're going to be able to bind into our application and then be able to test with. And then once we're happy, once we actually get the real data, we'll be able to switch the prototype bind source component with our actual real database and continue moving forward. So to take a look at that, I'm going to do a new FireMonkey mobile app, and I'm going to want this to be a blank app. And I'm going to put this out to the iPad, and I want it to be horizontal. So that's great so far. To put a title on this application and what we're going to call it, I'm going to drop a toolbar, and I want it aligned to the top, which it is already. And then on my toolbar, I'm going to drop a label just to give it the name of the app. And I don't like that color of the label, so I first want its title to be, for now I'm just going to call it my app. And what I love about iOS and all these style lookups is I got all these wonderful lookups, so I want this to be a tool label so that looks much better. All right, so that's my title. All right, next, so I want to drop a component on here to display all my items. And it's going to be one of these types of list components. So as far as list components, there's either a list box or a list view. Now for me, I use a list view if I have very long items of scrollable items. And I want that on the form. Let me do it this way. List view, I want to be placed on the form, which it is. And I want this list view to be aligned to the client. So a list view, like I said, if you have a long list of scrollable items, that's a great use of the list view component. The other component, list box, if you have shorter sets of lists, to put them on a list box is okay. But for me, I'm going to have very long lists of scrollable items, so I want to put them onto a list view. The next property I want to put on here is our prototype bind source. So this prototype bind source, so this is a new component to allow us to rapidly prototype applications when we don't have the actual database. So as we're going to see here, this prototype bind source, I can now add fields. So we see here for add fields, we have all different types of multiple fields in multiple formats. So for example, if I needed to add strings or Boolean or integer or maps to my application, I can prototype them off of this. So for now, I'm going to select a couple of these values. Like, for example, my application is going to use some bitmaps. I'm going to need some dates and currency in there. So I'm going to just multi-select a few of these fields and say OK. So I'm going to grab up the bitmaps down to a second date type. As I add them, we'll see here under the field definitions, they get added. So these are now equivalent to the actual fields that are going to be in our real database eventually. Now, if we take a look at this this list view, there's a property called item appearance, and it says on this list view component, I can add footers, and I can add headers, and I could add items, and I could add item edit components. So if we look at item and item edit component, we see under item, I can add accessories, and I could add text, and for the item edit, I can have accessories and text in a glyph button. So that's all pretty cool. So now for the items I want to add on here, we see its appearance is set to default by a list item. So it's just going to list them, one item at a time. But for me, I really want to customize what I put on this list view. So by selecting customize, now I can control the height and the width and the vertical text alignments. Now I have complete control over all the items I put in here. So let's say for the items I'm going to drop onto this list view, I want an image to be part of it. So I want to set the image to be visible. For the detail, I also want to add detail, so I'm going to set that visible. I want to add accessories, and I want to make that visible. And I also want to display the text and the details in a stacked manner. So to help me do that, I'm going to use the power of Visual Live Bindings. So I'm going to come over here to View, Visual Live Bindings Designer. So here we see our list view component and our prototype data source. And here's my toolbar and my label that I dropped on the form. So really quickly, I want to say I want the text on my list view to be equal to my contact title. And let's say I want the bitmap on my list view to be the bitmap from my prototype database. And lastly, the detail on my list view, I want to set that to, let's say, contact name. And what's cool about this, we get design time information here on the display as we're designing this, as we're prototyping it. Now, because I set this for custom, for the item property, I set it to custom. If that went back to the list item, all I'd get was a single list items. But I want to customize it with all these values. So now I can customize. So, for example, the item. So for specifically the text on here, I can set its height. So let's say it could be 60. And let's say for the image I want to drop on here, I want to set its height and width to both be about 40. And the detail that gets dropped on here, I want to change its text vertical alignment. I don't want it to be centered. I want it to be leading. And the text also, I want its text vertical alignment to be leading. And let's say I'm also going to change its offset position. Right now it's kind of stuck inside of the image. So I want its X offset. I want to bring it out a little bit. Let me bring it out to about 50. So it comes out a little bit, so that's great. And the detail, we want to tweak that a little bit more because I still don't like how it's showing up. So for the detail, I want to set its X and Y alignment. So let me bring this out about 50. And let me set the Y to come out around 15. Okay. So to take a look at what we've done, if I select list view and I click on this fill list, it'll tell me what it looks like so far. So it kind of looks good, but not exactly perfect as I like it. So I'm going to set the detail a little bit better. So this detail, instead of the Y position coming out to only 15, I want to make that a little bit better, like 30. And let's go back here again and fill list. All right, so now it's perfect. Now it's the way I like it. So that's what the custom view allows you to do, to customize this list view exactly how you want it. So that's cool. So this is what we did before we actually had the database. So now let's say we actually do get the actual database for the customer. So all we now need to do is replace our prototype bind with the actual database. So, like you said, with Delphi, any of these great databases are supported. So this is the recipe database we spoke about, the recipes database with the recipes and the favorites. So I no longer need this bind prototype here. I'm going to keep it here for now. I'm going to take this my recipes database and just drag it onto my form. So by default, that gives me the SQL connection. And just to make sure it can connect, that's fine. And when we dropped it on here, so now that we have our SQL connection, I want to add a SQL data set. Take my SQL data set, and I want to set its connection to my database. I don't need any metadata. I'm going to run a query. So So now it's connected to the SQL data set, I can get my database objects. So to this, I want to go to the recipes table, and let's say I want to bring in the recipe name, the picture, and the last time somebody viewed this. And I want it from the recipes table, so that's okay. So now if I activate the SQL dataset, we see our SQL dataset gets set here. So now it becomes as easy as removing this bind source and replacing it with our, so we no longer need the prototype bind source, so I'm just going to remove that. And now we have our SQL data set. So just like we did before, let's say the recipe name becomes the text value on my field. Okay, so I did something, put something, which is good. It's kind of protected me. It says you're trying to put a field to a value that does not exist, and that's okay. So recipe name has to be a text. So recipe name and text, it's happy with that. The bitmap will be the picture. And you see design time happening really cool. And the detail, let's set it to last viewed. So that's pretty cool. So we can go from prototyping and get the user interface looking exactly the way we want it. And then when we actually get our real database source, simply drop it onto it and replace the prototype bind source component with our actual database component. And now we're ready for production. So this was a quick overview on how you can use Listview component with the prototype data source, and then how easy it is to replace the prototype data source with an actual database connection, in this case to our recipes database and our recipes table. So how easy it is to replace the prototype with the real data when you actually get your real database. So very quickly go from prototype to production very faster. So that's pretty much what I wanted to show you at this point. At this point, I'm going to turn it back over to David and Anders, and he'll continue.
So this is my Macintosh side. I've got my PA server running here. That's sitting out. I created a desktop alias for it, and then everything gets cached on the hard drive as far as the applications and so on. I've got Xcode running. I've got my iPhone running here. I'll turn on Reflector, which is this $15. I don't know. Maybe Al, you paid less. You always pay less for some reason. I don't know why.
$12.99. $12.99 when I purchased it, my friend. No tax.
So let me bring up my my iOS, my iPhone 4S, and there it is. There's my computer. There's the Macintosh, and it's there. So let's go back now to the IDE. And so here's the project that I showed you the bitmap before. Here's the project, this recipe project. Here's the design surface in the designer. In the structure window, I've got an action list, some live bindings, a bunch of different tab controls. And there's a favorites tab, the home tab. I started this by saying file new FireMonkey mobile application, and I took the tabbed template. So here's, we give 8 different ones. There's a 3D application, a blank one, but I chose the tabbed one because I felt that the customer was going to ask for a lot of functionality, so I wanted to make sure that I had enough tabs. You can always add a tab, as Al and others have shown. You just go up here and on a tab control and you say add another tab item, for example, and you can create. I think there's an Apple, Anders, you probably remember this. I think Apple recommends no more than 5. If you have more than 5, then make the 5th one be a more ...
Yep.
In the user interface guidelines. So you can do it physically in the designer and in your code, but you have to be aware of what Apple's guidelines if you want to put it in the store and get it accepted. But in this case, I thought there'd be 5. So we've got different form, different contents on each of the tabs. Here we've got a layout, and inside of the layout, there's a label and a list box. We've got this image here, T-image, which is this nice bitmap that fits the desktop of the application that we're going to deliver, so it has a nice look and feel. On the recipes, we've got a list view. Al showed you a list view as well. We use list view when you're going to have lots of items, usually from a database, for example. You might have 10,000. Well, I don't know if you want to bring 10,000 at a time. Maybe you bring 50 at a time or 20 at a time. Use listbox when there's a few choices. So that's why over here, there's a query that we have that gives us the 3 most recent recipes. So in this case, it was okay. We felt comfortable using Listbox because we were only going to put 3 into it. And in order to give it that nice rounded corner look, we set the transparent style for Listbox in the style lookup. So you either have regular Listbox, which has the hard edge corners, or the transparent Listbox style is there for these specific rounded ones. You'll see that in action. We have the list view here and some accessories so that you can then go to the detail, and this gets populated by the database. We've got an add button if you want to add. You can also edit. Once you select a recipe from the list view, you can click the view accessory, and then there's a button for editing an existing recipe. But if you want to add a new recipe, there's a form for that. And then this is our favorites list, which is also a list view, because we might have hundreds and thousands of recipes in our database, but we may only make 100 our favorites, or 1, 2. But list views, again, because it's going to be something that could grow over time, especially if you have lots of favorite recipes. And this has a click event, so on item click again, and it's going to go over to some code to let you see the recipe, and you can edit from there, and you can make any recipe once you're editing it a favorite. There's a little switch, a T-switch component for turning favorite on and off and to have it show up in the list. Underneath the covers is code. So here in the form unit, there's, for example, here, if we hit cancel when we're editing, then it just sets the active tab back to the recipes tab. For example, here's some code on form create. It sets the tab control to the first tab of the index. So we always, because in the designer, sometimes if you're navigating around to different tabs and different pages within tabs, the ID remembers and sets the property in the designer to do that. So you want to, when you start the application, you always want it to start at the home page. So here we've got some code for doing that. Setting up some of the event handlers, doing updates. Here's some code for just getting the bounds so that we can do the virtual keyboard showing to have it grow up from the bottom and have the form move up. So there's some code for doing that, setting the different bottom right and top left of the form, of the screen form that we're on, and update the keyboard bounds so that the keyboard can grow up from the bottom up on top of it. There's code here for that recently accessed items, so that we can see the last 3 recently accessed items. That populates that. When we do any editing, we have apply updates that will post the changes back through the dataset provider back to the underlying database, and it puts up a show message telling the user that it posted. If you want to edit or cancel, then there's some code here for putting the client data set, either canceling it or putting it at the data set in edit mode. There's code for inserting a recipe. There's code here for if you cancel, hit the cancel button, depending on which editing part you're doing, whether you're editing something from a favorites or editing something from the list of recipes. And this is still a work in progress. Again, you'll see all of this when it gets put into the SourceForge repository. List view item click. We're going to populate the edit box with whatever the detail is from the favorites list that we clicked on, and we're going to make sure that we allow you to switch the favorites T-switch component, and if it's checked, then we'll do the right thing to set the right flag in the database and add it then to the data table for the favorites list, which just has, again, the favorites ID and the recipe ID. And then here's the insert. So when we add a new recipe, then it just calls params by name to build up the insert query, populating the name and the ingredients and so on. And that gets, and then calling the exec SQL for the insert query. Add tab item, just some little things. Detail, if we do apply updates on the detail versus an edited version, and just some other helper code down here. Again, as we're moving around in things, we've got some helper functions here for just cleaning up, and that's that part of the user interface part of the code. If we look at the data module, It's very straightforward. We've got a SQL connection component that is connecting to the driver called IB Lite, IB to go. And again, Anders posted a note. We're using the exact same InterBase database file that would run on Windows, Macintosh, Solaris server, Unix server, runs on InterBase desktop, on InterBase Developer Edition, a Macintosh version. IB Lite, IB to go use the exact same functionality. InterBase to go is InterBase in a DLL or dylib on Windows and Mac that you can deploy with your application. On iOS, it's a static library that gets linked into your application. Same with IB Lite, that's a static library. The distinction between InterBase to go and InterBase Lite gives you one transaction, but all the ANSI 92 capabilities of triggers, generators, stored procedures, all of that, built-in functions, sorry, I should say. And all the data types that you want. Gives you one transaction, that's IB Lite. InterBase to go gives you multiple transactions, database, table, and column encryption that's available. InterBase to go, we give you a test deployment license when you purchase exe4. We give you the ability to get an IB Lite unlimited license for the IB Lite deployment, so you can put InterBase server, in a sense, static library inside of your application, deploy it to millions of users along with your InterBase file. There's no change in coding for InterBase Lite, InterBase to go. That's why it says here that the driver is IB Lite, InterBase to go. They're exactly the same functionality, other than InterBase to go gives you extra capabilities and you buy licenses for that. IB Lite is free deployment itself. Again, same database. Somebody asked the question, how does it compare with SQLite? Well, SQLite has a few data types. It's open source. It's available on there's Windows, Mac versions, Linux versions people have built. There's a version that ships in Macintosh OS X. There's a version that's buried inside of iOS operating system and Android operating system. It has a few data types, no transactions. It has this locking mechanism, but no transactions. InterBase is a full ANSI 92 SQL, so every data type that's in this ANSI standard for SQL. So here's the SQL connection. We've got queries. That does the recent query. Let's just look at a query. It just says select star from recent recipes, order by last viewed, descending, rows 3. So that's why on that first page I get away with using a list box, because I'm only pulling the most recent 3 viewed recipes, sort of like your history of your browser kind of thing. Here's the recipes query. All these are very straightforward. Just select star from and order by recipe ID, so they're in order that way. We could order it by something else, of course, because again, it's all SQL. The insert recipe, you'd expect that to be, here it is, insert recipes. Here's the column names, and then the colon in front of an identifier, which then become the params by name, a param by name that you put in your code to stick the values in. You could also build the SQL string up dynamically in your code if you want to as well. Here's the favorites query. Again, same thing, select star from favorites. And this is doing a join based on the favorite flag and then looking at the recipe ID and ordering it by the recipe ID for your favorites. And so on. Is it a favorite? There's some other functions there. Here's our dataset providers, which provides the metadata and data to the client datasets. And then when the client datasets make any are changed, that gets stored in the Delta. And the client dataset, when you call apply update, sends the data back through this provider, back into and formulates SQL update statements back to the original database. So that's all good. That way, one piece of code that we put in to the data module, it just says when the data module is created, if we're not on Windows, then we need to set a different path. So on iOS simulator, iOS device, we don't have C:\/ or whatever the path might be. When I want to build a Mac OS X version, I would say ifdef Mac OS. I could also say ifdef MS Windows and ifdef iOS, for example. And so on iOS, we need to set the database param value to be, and we use this this code all the time. So the home path is going to be startup. Actually, if you look at it in a debugger, it's going to be something like private / something, the sandbox for your application. But when the application starts, files get copied from the app bundle into your startup documents directory, and that's where things like INI files, bitmaps, anything that's part of your deployment of your application. Path delimiters are, Some systems it's /, some systems it's \. So we get the home path / the folder documents on iOS. And then the path delimiter, and there's the name of the database, iosdb.ib. It's getting changed to recipes.ib when we finally ship. So we put that line of code in for each platform to tell us that way or you can put code somewhere else to set the database value. Again, if we go over here in MySQL connection, load the params, scroll down for Windows, so I could do the Win32 and turn on live at design time. I set the database path. I put all my databases in C:\data, put them wherever you want. They could be on a server somewhere if you wanted to as well at design time, if you have a license to that server. All right, so we want to make sure that we're there. I showed you on the bitmap the deployment options for this application. Here's my InterBase database. It's actually in my project folder, so it doesn't have any hard-coded path. And I tell it, when you run this application, this is where that database is going to be found. It's going to be startup. Notice the capital S, capital U, \, that's the path delimiter on iOS, and then capital D, documents. Now on the simulator, be careful. The simulator, if you have startup with a lowercase u, it'll still work. And so people go, gee, it works on the simulator, but it doesn't work on the, it says it can't find the database when I go to the device. The simulator is forgiving in some way, so it doesn't care about case sensitivity, but iOS cares very much so. So just to be safe, put a capital S, capital U, capital D. Now, how does all this stuff get sent to the startup folder and your documents folder? There's a simple answer to that, and the answer is in the main source file itself for the project. So if we right mouse click, if I can click properly, and we bring up the source code of the project, you will see a unit that is used, and it's the first unit before the forms file in the uses clause. And what it does is it puts some startup code that will do the copying of these deployment files that you have, your reg keys, your database, your bitmaps, your INI files, whatever it might be. It'll copy those from this private space that no one sees into the startup folders and documents and whatever else you put in your deployment remote target directory. And that will get generated. If you use the project templates, it will put that in the uses statement for the for your mobile projects. If for some reason you're getting weird things, it can't find a file when you run the app on the device, go into the main project source file and see if it's missing system.startup copy as the first unit. And then here we can, there's the form factor, you can set the orientation. So here we're hard coding the orientation. In this case, it was designed for iPhone in portrait mode. So in the main application.form factor orientations, you can set, this is a set operator with the square brackets. You could put a set saying, hey, I want this to work in portrait or landscape. In this case, we're going to force it only to be running in portrait mode. We'll create the data module, and we'll create the main form, and then the infamous application.run. All right. So that's basically what's in the application for data modules and so on. So let's look at this in the simulator first. We'll hit run. And now the ID will compile. I'd already pre-compiled. It's a compile link, and now it's deploying. So you'll see a bunch of files being deployed over. There goes the recipes IB Lite. The message window pops up over there that says in the message window that the PA client talks to the PA server. And here's my application running in the simulator. We can edit it. Brings up the keyboard. Notice it pops up from the bottom. We could set lemon bars as a favorite. Call apply updates. It's posted back. Go back here now. We've got 2 lemon bars as our recent ones. We can go back and let's see what our favorites are. Now we've got lemon bars as our favorite. And we can click here and see that, there's my app over here with the icon. Here it is starting up again with its little splash screen. All the splash screen and the icons are all set as part of the project options. Let's go back to the IDE. One last thing in project options. Under application here for iPhone, iPad, and you can also set the orientation. You can set your own custom icons for each of these, and you can preview them as well. So that's where the different launch images, the Spotlight search image, if you do Spotlight search on, on that first page of your iOS application, the application icon and so on. And then for iPad, since it's not iPad, I left the default ones, which are their FireMonkey default bitmaps there. Okay, so that's under application. If you're going to put it in the store, then there's version information that you need to include. You can also go down here and say the device family. That way, if you put it into the application iOS store, you can have it say iPhone or iPad or only, or iPhone and iPad. That way, when someone's looking for applications for their device, it'll only show you, this would only show up as if you were looking for iPhone apps versus if you were only looking for iPad apps or looking for either or. And so there's other information that's available in your project information as well. Let's now go to the device. So here's my device. 3 choices: debug, ad hoc, app store. I'm doing a debug build. So let's go and run this. We can set breakpoints in the IDE and do debugging. I showed that, I think, on one of the other ones. The difference between the Windows and Mac and simulator, those are all Intel-based applications. In the case of the iOS device, it's actually using the Delphi ARM processor compiler. So we'll come back over here and wait for a moment. I had it preloaded already, but it'll start up again. This is now using Reflector, looking at my iPhone device and displaying it on the Macintosh desktop. So as soon as it gets deployed, it has to code sign it and all of that, and then package it all up and send it over to the device through the USB cable, and then it will show up over here. Unless I did something wrong, did I? Oh, no, you saw the PA server flash for a moment as the IDE's communicating with it. And then I did something wrong. Did I do something wrong? Let's see if everything's okay. It looks like it's okay. All right. Oh, here it comes. There's the splash screen for my recipe app, so it looks really cool. People like that. And then it's going to load the database, and it's going to launch the application. And I'll have whatever favorites I had in the database before. Okay. So it's my Reflector and the network that's not. Oh, there it is. Okay. So that's working. So here I've got my recent recipes. Oh, it's funny, I always click on it because I'm used to using the simulator, but I actually have to tap on the app. So here now we've got the recipes, and we can go back. We can go to the recipe list. That's the list view. Choose a recipe. We can go and edit a recipe. These are the different things. We can go and edit it, and then notice the keyboard comes up. We can go and change the keyboard. We can set that as a favorite, scroll around, and then apply updates or cancel, just moving backwards. I go to the favorites page. Now I've got the tilapia. I really like Bananas Foster, so we can go back to the edit mode or not, and say, well, let's not make Bananas Foster a favorite. And then we'll save that back and go back, right? We can go and add a new recipe and so on. So all of that is running on the device, and it's running AirPlay, so there's a little delay from when I do it to when it shows up. And that's how easy it is to build a multi-tab application using Listview, Listbox where it's appropriate, a database, keyboard, and so on. Right? So let me switch back over here and change back to Anders number 1 instead of Anders number 2, and show the screen. And so we should be back in the slide deck. Let me just finish. There's some ideas we have for enhancing the app. I don't know if whether all of you will do that when you get the project from SourceForge, or whether we'll do some of this before we finish it. There is a bitmap blob in the database, as Al mentioned, and we could, since we have a T-camera component for iOS, if your device has a camera, we could take a picture and display it. You've done the recipe, done the ingredients right, and then you have it sitting there all laid out nice. Take a picture of it inside the recipe app. Maybe it's another page, another tab item, and then you'd see it and say, okay, yes, I want that, and a little bit of code to assign the image bitmap to the bitmap blob in the database, save it back, and now you've got the image as another tab item, for example, on the details page for the for the recipe, especially if it's a new one. You want to have a picture of it, right? Web browser component, I mentioned that. There's two text URLs. One is a URL to recipe or maybe a search engine for recipes with a parameter. Video URL if there's a video on YouTube or somewhere. And of course, then somebody's got to put those entries in the database. So a user interface for typing in or pasting, copying and pasting URLs. You can build a Windows and Mac version of the same project. I did that just with Win32 as a choice if you're building a mobile app, but I could create a new project, create a project group, and then as part of the project group, I just say file new FireMonkey desktop application HD and delete whatever the project template put for a main form, and just copy the form and source code unit and data module from the mobile project, just add existing files into my WinMac project, and then target Windows and Mac and say build and say run, and now I've got Windows and Mac versions using the same source code, the same form. Of course, might want to change it. It's laid out specifically for iOS. The bitmap for that little fork background and the recipe background is set up for iOS, but we could extend that, stretch it, whatever. There's all sorts of things to do. Maybe we want to put the database and put the database access in a DataSnap server and put it out on a cloud infrastructure or on a server somewhere. Then we would remove the database access, but we keep the client data set, and then we just put a DataSnap connection and a DataSnap provider component down, and those all can be put in your iOS applications. And then we talk through HTTP or TCP, depending on what your DataSnap server was built for, and you can have a very thin client that doesn't have any database, doesn't have to deploy the InterBase database. It just has to know how to talk to a DataSnap server through an IP address or a name. So there's lots of things to do. Put it in an Amazon cloud, and so lots of other little things to do. Whether you do it, we do it, or somebody else happens to do it. Lots of things that you can do to keep adding to this design and implementation of the recipe app. And this app will appear in SourceForge in the next couple of weeks, so just stay tuned to the SourceForge repository and Anders or one of ours blogs saying, hey, the recipe app is there now. We're also going to submit it to the App Store to just show yet another example of the apps that you can build with Delphi XE4 for iOS with FireMonkey and our own compiler are accepted by Apple. There's already some in there. Anders has some, and other people have put apps built in Delphi XE4. So Apple's accepting them. We're not doing anything wrong in that way. We tried to make the look and feel, the style, the buttons, and all that. But of course, it's up to you to follow. Don't put back buttons down inside the form, or don't put them, at the bottom somewhere. Apple really likes the back buttons being up there at the left of the toolbar. And there's a whole bunch of documentation about how to build apps to make sure they get accepted. We'll have there'll be a webinar on June 12th that Serena is doing, so stay tuned for news about that, where she's going to go through all of the best practices for user interface design for iOS to get your apps accepted into the App Store. So that'll be on June 12th. There's no registration yet, so stay tuned. I'm sure you'll get emails, but you can also stay tuned to that events page and calendar on Embarcadero.com. We just announced, some people contacted and said, look, they couldn't get their upgrade orders in by the 22nd of May. They needed more time. They're still doing the trial. They're still convincing their boss or their significant other to spend the money. And so we've extended the 10% discount offer until the end of June. So a little more time for you to get the introductory discount offer. Just go to Embarcadero.com/RAD offer. That decision just happened. We heard from a lot of people who had their paperwork in the works, but couldn't get it completed in time. And we'll switch here in a moment to the questions. Next week is how to scale up your application. DataSnap, cloud, all of that is how to make everything bigger in the applications that you build. Make sure it can scale to large databases, server databases, to use web services, and so on. So that's next Friday's topic. Also, June 7th will be on data visualization, engineering, and scientific graphics. Anders will be here with his math visualization and his waveform dynamic visualization. I've got some data visualizations that I've been working on, and so that'll be fun on the 7th. And then again, June 14th for the season finale. We have our Embarcadero.com site, EDN, and also our different social network areas, YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. We have Embarcadero accounts and areas on each of those. The links are on the company's homepage. If you go to Embarcadero.com, look in the upper right-hand corner, there's 4 different icons. Click on them. That's the links, or you can just search for Embarcadero YouTube or Embarcadero LinkedIn if you're on those different networks. Here's our email addresses. So if we can't get to everything today in the questions, you can always send to developerdirect.online@embarcadero.com. You can send individuals to us or just any of the other evangelists around the world. Pretty easy. We all have blogs, so look there for information and links to things if you're trying to find a replay or whatever. We're all blogging to help get you the information that you need. So for Q&A, you can use the Q&A interface in GoToWebinar. You could post a tweet. I've got my iPad over here where I'm monitoring what's happening on the Twitter feed. I've been posting a few links. I posted a link to the RAD, SourceForge RAD demos area. That's on Twitter. Just, again, go search for #EMBTDD. But let's go. And Anders, you've been working on the triaging a bunch of the questions. He's not saying much. He just got back from a trip to Mexico. I think you were in Mexico City and Guadalajara.
Yeah, I did the XE4 launches there.
And I think you picked up something down there. I think we call it travelers fun. No.
Let's just say everything is not completely stable.
Okay. Yes, he's got some instability. He needs to debug his body. Yeah. Okay, Anders. So let's see. How can I share the database component connection when using multiple data modules on a DataSnap server? I have multiple server modules, multiple queries. Oh, so I mean, data module. You can have multiple data modules. You can have multiple server modules, is what we would call them, if they also have extra capabilities. For example, like methods. Public methods for remote methods as well.
Yeah, if I understood the question correctly, and there hasn't been a rephrasing of it, so I'm guessing the answer is satisfactory. I think he wanted to share the database connection between 2 different data modules, and the way you do that is just like you have done in the past. You just use the other unit from the first one, and then the selection in the object inspector would just work just fine, and it'll say data module dot SQL connection 1 or something.
Yeah, use the full name, whatever the name of the data module class name is, or component name. So usually I make mine either DM or DMOD, but sometimes I give them real names. But yeah, you can just use the different units, just as if to use a data module in a form, you use the data module as a used unit in the form. There was a question here about what's the advantage of doing InterBase Lite or InterBase to go versus SQLite in iOS? Well, again, SQLite, it has, I think, 4 data types. It has locking, doesn't have transactions. There are different builds of SQLite. If you're going to want to do multi-device, Windows and Mac, there's different build options. Depends on who built the version of SQLite. I think Macintosh version doesn't have metadata built in by default. There's different, but of course you have the source code, so you can set the right conditional defines and then build your own version of the dylib on Mac. So there could be some differences. In our case, IB Lite, InterBase to go, and InterBase Server, InterBase Desktop, InterBase Developer Edition, they're all the same engine, all the same capabilities. The limitation is only as it relates to number of transactions. With IB Lite, you can have 1 transaction active at a time. With InterBase to go and Server, you can have lots of transactions. IB Lite is unlimited deployment. InterBase to go, the test deployment gives you a certain number of users, and then you come and purchase from our resellers or from us extra CPU licenses, extra server licenses, extra user licenses if you want the full InterBase Server or full InterBase to go. Again, encryption on InterBase to go and InterBase Server versus IB Lite doesn't have encryption of tables, databases, and columns. But again, your code is exactly the same across all the platforms if you're using InterBase, regardless of whether it's InterBase Server, Desktop, to go, or IB Lite. The question about how to deploy my SQLite database, you put it in startup, just like we did, capital S, capital U, slash documents, and you put your, whatever the extension is. SQLite, you don't have to have an extension. It's just called test. It could be test.db. Some people say test.s3db. They give it an extension. But you just do it like we did, and I showed you the picture. You put your SQLite database in capital S, capital U, startup, / documents, capital D. And that's where you can
I think for there he's saying he clicked into that remote path box, but it never opened up in edit mode where he can change it. So I've seen that myself. I click it once, double click it. Eventually you'll get it into an edit mode where you can change it from the dot / to startup / documents. And
the other thing, Al, is even if you double click or click to get into edit mode and you type it, you have to hit enter as well.
That's
if
correct.
You haven't hit enter and you go down and say done, or you move somewhere else, it actually hasn't been saved back to the deployment descriptor information file, which is called proj deploy or something like that, out in your folder. So I would make that mistake. I'd type it in, but I'd go do something else, and you have to hit enter into each of those edit boxes. Those are some of the things that we have on our list to make a little more friendly. There's no copy and paste either, for example. I'd really like that inside of it because it's a grid. You know, we're using a grid component there in that deployment area. Let's see. This is a question Gregor's asking. Simulate home button click by code, but closing the application called application.terminate if you really want to close. But I think, Anders, you're saying...
You should never do that.
Oh, I'm sorry. But you can.
You can, but it will not work. The only way to shut down your application on the iPhone is to raise an exception that you do not handle, but you should never do that either.
Well, I like doing that. I get crash logs.
Well, it is against the user guidelines for iOS applications. If you submit an application to the App Store that terminates itself, you will get denied.
Oh.
You're right. No app on this iPhone's iPad actually close. They just continue to run in the background forever.
You can close a form
until you double click on that home button and you find them all in there, and you hold down one, and then you have to X them all out.
So but you can close a form. You could say main form.close.
Oh, close a form, yeah, but he wants to simulate the home button, which sends it to the background.
Oh, I thought he meant the home button on the recipe app.
No.
Sorry. The home button, on the iPhone itself. Sorry. Okay. I would like to see some sample of push notifications of future webinars. Anders, I think you covered that it was when I was in Europe 2 weeks ago, right, on Developer Direct?
Yeah, something like that. Episode, what are we on now?
We're on 6 of 4.
So I think 4.
So look at the replay, episode 4. Anders did...
but there's been a lot of follow-up questions on my blog and via email and stuff, so I will record a more complete video.
But there is information on your blog as well.
There is, and I'm going to post some more responses by pictures actually here shortly. I'm editing pictures right now for how to set it up and provisioning profiles and all that stuff.
David's asking, rather than deploy a data file, I would like to create a device. You can do that. You can create a database. You can create a table. In the case of SQLite, there's a create. If you get an error, there's a setting. There's a part of the setup for creating it. But you can create databases and tables. There's APIs with InterBase. InterBase Express has some enhanced components to let you do that work as well. And those are the questions so far. Anything else to add? I'm sorry about application terminate. I mean, I know because I called it. I wasn't thinking about whether I get accepted. I guess if I had an enterprise account, I wouldn't have to worry about Apple canceling my app.
True. And there is actually, I'm not sure what they're doing, but the application called Waze, W-A-Z-E, it's a GPS navigation.
It's out of Israel.
App.
Rumored to be acquired either by Yahoo and or Google in a bidding war, I think.
Oh, there you go. Not shocking at all. It's actually a really good app.
I use it too.
They have a switch off button, which does some magic stuff. But I would recommend, because the only reason that they actually have a switch off button is because you want to save battery. So instead of doing that, they should just turn off their location sensor, and now you're no longer sucking battery.
Maybe that's what it does.
No, actually, it shuts down the app. It closes, and that is explicitly forbidden by the guidelines.
How'd they get accepted?
I have no idea.
Because you were the one that showed it to me first, and then I bought it as well because I use it.
There you go.
It's a combination of location, traffic reports, and social networking. And it has voice activation, so you can say police, and it gets your location and it puts a little cop icon on the map. It's pretty cool.
There you go.
So or if you're in the passenger, which you were doing, I think you were driving, went to San Francisco Airport, and I was using it and tapping in like slow, and it tracks how fast you're going. And if it's slow, it pops up and says, "Are you in traffic?"
Yeah.
And it asks you, is it dead stop, or is it going slow, or stop and go? And you can use a few words with voice recognition, or you can, you're not supposed to do this, but you could type very quickly because it's kind of a browsable interface. But yeah, that's the ways thing. Gregor said he wants to see example of FireDAC. Fine, we'll do that. We'll do that in the coming weeks. You can use FireDAC, just drop it down, drop the components down, 80 connection instead of SQL connection. We have FireDAC samples all over the place, but we'll do that. Maybe we'll do that in the season finale. And Abdullah was asking, how can I use SQL Server 2008 database with iPhone? The only way that I know to do that is build a DataSnap server in Delphi or C++ builder that talks to SQL Server, whatever version, 2008, 2005, whatever. And then you just, on your iPhone, build a DataSnap client and talk through TCP or HTTP from iPhone or iPad to your DataSnap server. And DataSnap server running on Windows can talk to SQL Server running on Windows.
Yep. And that's because there is no client library for SQL Server for iOS. Surprise, surprise.
You don't think Microsoft wouldn't want to have more iPhones sold?
I think they're focused more on their phones.
They wouldn't give you a SQL Server Express edition that you could deploy to an iPhone?
I don't think so.
Oh, man. What kind of people are they? They're running all the... But yeah, that's a great way to use DataSnap or a web service. You could have a SOAP server or a REST server that you built in Delphi or somewhere that runs on Windows and talks to the database. But DataSnap, if you want full metadata, full update, client data set, apply updates, connect, disconnect, all that stuff, build a DataSnap server.
And actually, I usually answer that question with a little bit more information as well. You should never connect to a remote database directly from a mobile device simply because of the connectivity issues that you're going to have. When you lose connection, you jump between networks, you jump between Wi-Fi networks.
Drive over Highway 17.
Exactly. You're just going to, that connection is going to go in and out, and if you're in the middle of a transaction, all bets are off.
That's what makes client data set so nice. When you say apply updates, if it fails for some reason, no problem. Just come back and try apply up. Give your user a little interface saying something happened. Wait a little while and hit apply updates again.
Yep. So
and play all those transactions back.
So SQL Server is actually a perfect scenario. You have to have some kind of middle tier.
And again, using DataSnap, it's the Delphi way and the C++ builder way. It's built into the enterprise and above products that we have. So you can build that DataSnap server, a REST server. We've got lots of videos from Code Rages and webinars galore. My 31 videos, my learning how to program in Delphi for Windows and Mac and for C++. Lots of stuff we have. Pavel Glovatsky's got his Delphi Labs DataSnap. He's got 11 different lessons that you can go through with videos and white papers, so you can search for that if you don't know DataSnap. It's a great way to connect. Oracle has some kind of connectivity to Oracle, but it's through Java. They have this kind of Java connector that you put on your iOS device. Heaven forbid Java and its security holes. And then you call through their middleware to their Fusion middleware. But in here, we just drop down components. We don't have to write any code. I can do multi-tier in, well, maybe one line of code. Sorry. Two, if I count the wizard generating a line of code. But in any case, everybody, we're way past time. These used to be 2 hours, then we tried to cram into 1 hour, but there's always so many good questions, so much to show. Again, great to have you all here. We'll see you all here next week. Let me switch back to the schedule. Next week, building your model to scale, then multi-device data visualization, and then the season finale. And then some people will be on summertime, I guess, except in the southern hemisphere where they'll be on wintertime, probably heading to Chile or New Zealand or somewhere to go skiing. Okay, everybody, have a great weekend. Al, as always, it's great to have you with us, even though you're on the other side of the country.
Someone's got to take care of all the Delphi users on this side of the country, so I'm happy. I'm happy it's me.
Absolutely. And then, Anders, back to have you in the country. Sorry you have to debug yourself. And everybody, take care. Bye.
Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.